better contributions to NDCs, that is National Determined Contribution. It would obviously talk about more climate commitments, and the most important is biodiversity loss, which is what remains the key factor. So we could talk about greater focus on forests and biodiversity. So that would also be one of the important factors that the country would look towards COP31. Moving on to the next slide. What are the advocacy takeaways that we have taken from this session is that there should be limits for reducing carbon emissions. There should be voices and communities and institutions and vulnerable communities that should be provided support, plus amplifying the voices of institutions that are working towards climate advocacy and pushing for nationally determined commitments so that it can help achieve climate advocacy, or we say climate sustainability or equity that we are asking for, and climate finance. Without climate finance, climate advocacy would be a very long term and a far away route to achieve. So for that, we need to ensure that there is proper climate funding, climate finance, and for that we need proper policies which actually denote and actually can understand our thing, so that we can propose our policies in a way that we are able to generate those climate funds. Moving on to the next slide. How to advocate effectively. If you're talking about climate issues, it's very important that the policy brief should be such that it is understandable and easy for every organization or every group that we are proposing it to. We should bring that climate issues to local impact, how it is going to affect each person, not only the person who is on a very high social strata, but also a person who is walking on the road, who is earning a mere income. So the poor and the rich, so that population gap should be made understood, because people feel that these are so terms, the technical terms, that it is not going to affect us. But we should make them understand for different audience. As the second point show, that tailor messages for different audience. So there are different audience, different target audience, but we need to actually tailor those messages and make them understand in the different ways. If it's a tea seller, then we need to make him understand how his choices would affect and would pose greater climate risk. However, if it's a stakeholder organization where we are proposing our idea to, it should be in a different policy brief so that it is understandable to that organization. Next slide. What the impact of climate change as I talked about? It shows how we have degraded from a healthy ecosystem, a nature-based system, to where there is a risk of global warming. There is an issue where climate risk is not affecting health, but also posing a risk to ecosystem, and highlights the urgency for climate action and advocacy at local levels to be started, so that at national levels we can actually reduce, if not completely eradicate, the climate risks. Next. Transformative climate metrics. Obviously, there was global warming limit and there was target that we should prevent this catastrophic limit, which was talked about in COP28 and COP30. Then there was this annual climate finance commitment that was of USD 100 billion. That was also talked about in COP. And there were essential decisions that were taken by developing nations to support climate action. If we talk about renewable energy capacity, the goal was to triple it by 2030 for a sustainable future. That would be discussed in COP30. Moving on to the next slide. The key takeaways that we can take was that advocacy drives climate policy and public action, and therefore we should prioritize practical solutions and turn climate commitments into actions. Because if we're not turning it into actions, there is the thing is lost in the practice itself. And to build a resilient future together, because if we minimize or reduce the climate risk, it would eventually build a healthier ecosystem. Next slide. From climate advocacy to policy, obviously identifying key issues, like framing issues, I would tell, to focus on what are the pressing concerns, what are the most important priorities that we need, then collaborate with communities which are working for the same or stakeholders, and then craft policy recommendations that could be worked for a longer term. And if short term, then what are the measures that we are going to take, what would be the outcomes, and if the outcomes are not, then we would start with these. So I'll be handing over the presentation to Parth, and he would be taking it on from here.
All right. Am I audible, everyone?
Yes, Parth, you are audible.
All right, perfect. Very good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shreya, for telling us about climate advocacy. And now we'll be talking about connecting advocacy to public policies. So, to start with, we'll be talking about what does public policy actually? So, public policy basically refers to the decisions or the actions which are made by the governments to address different issues that affect our society. And these issues can be climatic issues, or social issues, or educational issues, and these policies basically guide how resources are allocated and how problems are solved. And when we talk about public policy in a climate context, then policies aim to reduce emissions and strengthen resilience and protect ecosystems and support sustainable development. And they typically flow in form of a policy cycle. So the policy cycle starts with identifying the problem and then setting an agenda, then designing solutions, implementing them, and then finally evaluating that what are the impacts of those implemented policies. So that's one of the major areas where countries should focus on, because as of now, especially in the developing countries, the majority of the focus is on setting policies and making policies and implementing them, but not a lot of emphasis is paid on the review and evaluation. And good data is very important for making any policy, so that's some way which we should focus on. And yeah, so after the data and evaluation is done, after the data collection is done, it further feeds into refining the policy further. So it is kind of a continuous cycle. That's why it's known as the policy cycle. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll be now talking about the governance journey. So climate governance is a long-term process and it is not a one-off decision. And it is something which takes place gradually over the years. And it starts with recognizing a problem and then creating policy frameworks. And this is followed by international cooperation through agreements such as the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and then where each country shared different climate goals and where the 1.5 degree and the 2 degree limits were decided. And then after that, each country has to develop its own national policies and institutions to implement these commitments. Like, for example, in India, we have the Niti Aayog, the National Institution for Transforming India, which majorly looks after coordination between different ministries and implementation of the SDGs. And then finally, government should monitor progress, evaluate results, and adopt policies based on new evidence and changing circumstances, and actually seeing what are the impacts of the policies they implemented on the first place. Next slide, please. All right, we shall now be talking about understanding governance structure. So, climate governance happens at multiple levels, at local level, national level, regional level, international level, and each level has a different role to play. Like, for example, governments develop policies, and NGOs and civil societies passionately advocate and monitor implementation, and researchers provide evidence, scientists provide different scientific evidence, and the citizens like you and me and the youth, we contribute through participation and accountability. And good governance is built on principles like transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. And most importantly, effective policymaking should be evidence based and collaborative, so that decisions reflect both the scientific knowledge and the needs of the affected communities. There's another major issue which is happening in the global, especially in the global south, and now increasing in the global north as well, that the scientific community of a country is taking a backseat in decision making. So it is important to prioritize what they say and the evidence that they give us. One of the international panels which is actively working on publishing data and assessing the impacts of climate change is the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it publishes something that's the synthesis report. And as of now, it's in the process of publishing the seventh edition of the synthesis report. Next slide, please. Yeah, so now we'll be talking about the international frameworks, agreements, and organizations. So, climate action is guided by several important international frameworks, and the UNFCCC is the biggest of them and the most major and most relevant, and it provides the overall platform for global climate negotiations. And it majorly meets, it has this big conference, which you all might have heard about, the COP, the Conference of Parties. So this year, the COP 31 will take place in Turkey. Last year was in Belém, in Brazil. And then after that, under the UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, and the agreement commits countries to limit their global warming and regularly update their national climate plans, which are known as the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. And then we have the SDGs. So the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals, complement these efforts by linking climate action with social and economic goals such as poverty reduction, health and biodiversity goals, and economic development. And together, these frameworks encourage countries to work collectively while implementing solutions which are suited to their initial circumstances. One of the biggest features of the SDGs is that it's a no one size fits all approach, and they are universal, and they are applicable to each and every country. So they are made it in a very flexible way. Next slide, please. All right, we shall now be talking about India's climate roadmap. So, India's climate strategy focuses on balancing economic growth with sustainable development. Because we are a developing country, we have to become a developed country, and at the same time, we also have to manage our decarbonization efforts. So, one key element which is implementing India's NDCs under the Paris Agreement, and like for example, some of our NDCs are having 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by year 2030 and being carbon neutral by year 2070. And India is also rapidly expanding on solar and wind energy while also investing in energy efficiency and green technologies. And apart from mitigation, India is also working on climate adaptation measures, and it remains a priority. And it includes measures in, for example, climate resilience, agriculture, or water conservation and disaster preparedness. And together, these efforts strengthen both environmental sustainability and long term development. Next slide, please. All right, so now I would hand over to Sachi for taking on from here.
Yes, thank you so much, Parth and Shreya. Yeah, so we understood about climate advocacy, we understood about how a policy is made, but it's important to know that in detail. So of course, how is evidence-based policy making occurs? The first part is research, then we move on to data, and then we move on to consultation. But my question to you all is, why do well-intentioned policies sometimes fail to achieve their objectives? Government invest significant resources in addressing issues such as poverty, climate change, public health, etc., etc. But still, those policies do not work. Now, the problem is not a lack of effort or funding, but the challenge lies in how we understand and manage complex systems. And that is why I will start with four important concepts today that help us think about public policy differently. Next slide, please. Um, we'll be starting with policy coherence, moving on to silo-based thinking. Then we'll be looking at systems thinking, which is highly important. And lastly, my most favorite, causal loop diagrams. And we'll wrap up with a case study in climate finance. Now, what is actually the policy problem? Imagine a government wants to reduce poverty. If all the ministries they start acting differently independently, then how would a solution come out? That is the problem that we are going to focus on, and that is why policy coherence is important. Next slide, please. Policy coherence means ensuring that the policies across different sectors, ministries, and levels of government work together towards shared objectives rather than undermining one another. Why does it matter? Because of course most public problems are interconnected. For example, let's take the example of climate change, because we're talking about climate change advocacy. Climate policy is not only about environmental ministry, it is also about environmental policy, energy policy, industrial policy, agricultural policy, transport policy, etc., etc. Now, let me just give you an example. Okay, let's just suppose that Ministry of Environment promotes solar energy. Okay, that is a good step. Okay, now Ministry of Industry, what does it do? It subsidizes coal production. Okay, that is the second step. Okay, if we look at it individually, both the ministries are going in the right direction. The third ministry, let's talk about Ministry of Finance, and it gives tax incentives to fossil fuels. Again, it's a good step. But if we collect them, if we see them collectively, we will see that each policy makes sense individually, but collectively they produce contradictory outcomes. And this is why there is a problem of policy coherence. Now, what are the types of policy coherence? The first one is horizontal coherence, like in the same level, coordination across ministries. Like environmental ministry should work with the Ministry of Industry. Ministry of Industry should work with Ministry of Finance. They shouldn't be working individually. Then we have vertical coherence. We have talked about horizontal coherence on the same level. Vertical coherence means on different levels, on different tiers. That is national government, state government, and of course municipal governments or district governments. If the objectives of national government and the state governments are different, again there will be a conflict, and we won't be able to see policy coherence, and policy would fail. The third one is temporal coherence, which means short-term decisions should support long-term goals. For example, a government promising net zero emissions by 2050 while approving dozens of new coal plants today lacks temporal coherence. So the actions that you are making today should actually help the results that we are needing in future, or we are aiming at future. Lastly, I would, when I'm talking about policy coherence, I would love to take the connection between policy coherence and SDGs. One SDG often influences several others. Okay, investing in clean energy, SDG 7, affects health, SDG 3, education, SDG 4, economic growth, SDG 8, climate action, SDG 13. We will look at it through causal loop diagrams shortly. Next slide, please. Yes, here you can see an example of electric vehicle integration. You can take a screenshot or just go through it quickly. So you can see how electric vehicle integration, understanding its policy coherence is important. Next slide, please. We have covered this. Please, next slide. Yes, now silo-based thinking. Silo-based thinking is when we are looking at things individually and not collectively. Okay, when organizations, ministries, or departments operate independently and focus only on their own objectives. Okay, this is my ministry. This should be my department, and this should be my aim. And another ministry is doing the same. So how would they work collectively? What would be the result? What would be the solution? Would it be a collective solution? Absolutely not. And there would be a failure in the policy. Okay. Why do silos emerge? Because governments are structured by sectors. Typical ministries like health, education, energy, agriculture, transport. Each has its own budget, its own indicators, its own reporting structure, its own priorities. And as a result, they often solve problems separately. Okay, imagine government wants to reduce rural poverty. Okay, education ministry starts building schools. Okay, fine. Individually, it's working well. Health ministry starts building clinics. Then energy ministry starts expanding electricity access. Water ministry provides clean water, etc., etc. Each initiative is useful here. We are not looking at initiatives individually, but policy coherence teaches us what? That we should be looking at it collectively. Okay, and not we should not be having silo-based thinking. But if they are designed independently, schools may have no electricity, clinics may lack clean water, okay, water pumps may lack power. This result is a fragmented development. Now let's move on to systems thinking. That is one of the solutions that we can look at it. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Yes. Okay, now sometimes when we think about a problem, okay, let's shoot a solution, and that is the, we can just square it out. Okay, 2 plus 2 is 4, and that is the answer. But sometimes 2 plus 2 is not 4. We have to look at it with different aspects. Okay, systems thinking emerged because many policy problems cannot be understood through linear cause and effect relationships. Okay, traditional thinking asks us what causes problem X, but systems thinking tends us to ask what network of interactions continuously produce problem X. Okay, sometimes problem X would not be produced just by one cause or one problem. It can be it can be produced by various other issues, and that is why key assumptions are interdependence should always be there, because when we see interdependence between various problems, then we look at the solution collectively. Everything is connected. Feedback is important, and actions create reactions. Okay, there should be no delays. Effects often appear years later. Okay, of course, when we look at it now, maybe we won't be able to see the after effects, but in the following years, the negative effects would be seen. I would like to give an example here. For example, energy poverty. Okay, a traditional approach says people are poor because they lack income. Systems thinking will force us to ask, why do they lack income? Why is productivity low? Why is education poor? Why is health poor? And why is energy access limited? Eventually, we discover a network rather than a single cause. Okay, so it's not just one problem and then a solution. No, many problems, many issues can cause one problem. Okay, and we should be looking at it collectively. Now let's move on to the last part. Yes, my favorite, causal loop diagrams. We have the diagrams in the next picture, next slide, please. Can we move on to the next slide? Now, one question that emerges here is, if everything is connected, how can policymakers visualize those connections? This is why causal loop diagrams is highly important. Now, because we are working on a research, we are doing a research boot camp, it means that understanding causal loop diagrams is an important step of how a research should be conducted. Next slide, please. I don't know if we can zoom in. I hope it's visible. Like, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so you can see how one SDG is affecting the other. You see, SDG 1, no poverty, then SDG 8, then SDG 2, all of them are connected. Okay, less poverty, decent work would, of course, have less poverty, then less food security. Okay, zero hunger. Zero hunger means no poverty. So you see, everything is connected. You cannot say, okay, people have become rich now, people are not poor, okay, or no poverty is seen, then they might not have, still have the problem of zero hunger. No, everything is connected. Once they have good work, they will have, money to invest on themselves. They will have good food, of course. They will have good education. Then the cycle will continue and no poverty would be seen. But if we strike at it like directly, garibi hatao or no poverty, then it might not work effectively. Yes. So of course we can see the logic is better education, better employment, higher income, higher tax revenue, more public investment, better education, etc., etc. And this is a reinforcing loop. Okay, one affecting the other. Yes. Can we move on to the next slide? Yes. Now we'll be transitioning to climate finance. Here I have an example, a case study actually, of one of the. We can move on to the next slide. Yes. What is climate finance? It's actually how to facilitate these policies. Okay. Of course, policies are made, but how do funding occurs and where does that funding go? How is that funding conducted, etc., etc. Let's begin with that part. Okay. Yes. So we'll be looking at the first slide, please. I mean, the previous slide. Yes. We'll be looking at Green Climate Fund. Okay. Now, the governance problem is principal agent theory. At its core, the GCF is trying to solve a classic policy problem. Donor countries contributing money. But now, if every donor country is contributing money, they are contributing money, they won't be able to see where is that money going, or if that money is being used effectively or not. Okay. And here the principles are principles are the donors. Okay, donor countries contributing money, and the agents are implementing organizations, national governments, project developers, etc., etc. Okay, the principles and agents. Principles means who are giving, okay, and agents means who are using those resources given by the principles. But the problem is, because they cannot directly observe what happens, around the globe, like in 100 plus countries, this creates information asymmetry, risk of corruption, misallocation, which we have seen in a lot of cases, greenwashing, political capture, etc., etc. Now, why does accreditation occur? Can we move on to the next slide? Most people think that accreditation is administrative paperwork. It is actually a governance tool. Before receiving GCF funds, institutes must demonstrate fiduciary standards. Now, what does that mean? Like, fiduciary standards would have questions like, can the institutions manage large amounts of money? Are procurement systems transparent? Or are accounting systems robust, etc., etc. This addresses financial risk, environmental and social safeguards as well. Now, the question which is being launched here is, could a climate project create social harm? Example, a hydropower project may reduce emissions, okay, but can also displace indigenous communities. Climate benefits alone are not sufficient. Projects must satisfy broader governance standards. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here you can see accountability architecture, which I found very interesting. So you see multi-level oversight. So GCF has multi-level oversight, which means donors, they give money to GCF board, okay, and the GCF board would give it to accredited entity, then executing entity, and then beneficiaries. So it's going through multiple levels, okay, and hence if a problem, let's suppose if a problem arrives at GCF board level, then they would be held accountable. So various levels will help us hold accountability in a more stronger way. So key idea is multiple layers of accountability. Yes, next slide, please. Now, three types of audit. So it's not just if the resources are being allocated to the countries. Okay, that is not the only result that we are wanting. But we are also wanting to see if the performance is being conducted properly. So three types of audit are: first one is financial audit. If the money is spent correctly. Okay, this is the first thing that we keep in mind. Then we have performance audit, which is about are the outputs delivered? Are the solutions that we were looking at, are we getting those? And impact. Okay, problem is, we are trying to have the resources. Now we have allocated the resources are being utilized. But when the resources are being utilized, is it actually solving the cause? I mean, is it actually solving the problem that we were looking at initially? Okay, that is the impact that it is creating. Okay, example, 50 solar systems are planned. Okay, 32 are delivered. Okay, financially we are compliant, but performance gap is there because only 32 are delivered. You see the deliverance gap, the performance gap. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Yes, the major key takeaway that you can see here is policy coherence is the goal, silo-based thinking is the challenge, and systems thinking is the mindset. Causal loop diagrams are the tool for understanding complexity. So everything is linked here. You see a problem not through just, 1 plus 1 is 2. No. Okay, 1 plus 1 is 2, but why is 1 plus 1 is 2? That is also important to understand here. And with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sachi. So for now, the second moderator, my partner Devashish, will be taking on. So the stage is yours, Devashish.
Thank you so much, Shreya, Parth, and Sachi for that incredible walkthrough. From grounding advocacy in evidence to breaking down how different frameworks operate across scales, and finally to showing us finance in action through real-world case study. With that, we'll now move on to the Q&A session. The floor is open. So if you have a question, please use the hand raise feature and we'll come to you one by one. Feel free to ask our speakers any question you may have. You can also write down your questions in chat box.
I can see that there are two questions in the chat box.
Yeah.
So can we start with the question in the chat box, if that's all right?
Yeah.
Sure. So I'll be taking on the first question, which basically talks about how to get government agencies to take action. So again, when we talk about, since we focus on systems thinking and policy coherence, we also have to look at the different agencies which are working for the particular issue. Like, for example, if I talk about climate change, then UNDP India, along, just to give an example, UNDP India, UNESCO, and the NITI Aayog, and the Haryana state government worked on a project for localizing the SDGs. So the SDGs, there are 17 goals, as most of us know. And then with these 17 goals, they are further divided into 169 targets. And then these 169 targets further has 252 indicators. Like, for example, if I have a particular goal, just to simplify it, my goal is to score 10 CGPA in my next semester in exams. Okay, so that's the goal. And for goal, my target is basically suppose studying one chapter daily of my course. All right, and that's the target. And then after that, then comes the indicators. Indicators are for reviewing for actually assessing that how much progress is made. So SDGs are made in such a way, as I said during the presentation, that they're universal. So, what these three entities, UNDP India, Niti Aayog, and Government of Haryana did was that they localized the SDGs, and then after that, made them into 8 different broad themes and 500 plus indicators, which included some essential indicators and some optional indicators. So, and then after that, once this framework was developed, the next step was mapping different government schemes. So they mapped some 120 plus government schemes which were delivered by the state government. And then after that, they rationalized it further and they merged schemes which are overlapping each other. So this way they were able to reduce the financial leaks. And why this was possible is because the Haryana government has a department for finance and planning. So one particular department does both the works of the finance and the planning, whereas in multiple different state governments or multiple national governments, both these functions are taken on by different departments or different entities. So that's why it makes coordination between them difficult. So yeah, the first step I would say to have some meaningful implementation is mapping the systems and to see why a particular policy is not being implemented and then deep diving into it and then correcting the systems first and making them capable for delivering that particular policy. So that's what I would like to say.
Yeah, Parth. We have more questions.
Sure.
So, Kalpana has asked, what is the difference between policymakers and system thinking in research aspects?
Okay, so policymakers are basically, it can be, suppose, for example, if we talk in context of government, then the ministers and the bureaucrats are the policymakers. If we talk about in context of, suppose, a company, then the board of directors and the chief executives are the policymakers. So policymakers are basically the people who make the policy, and systems thinking is one of the tools for basically thinking of policies. Suppose, for example, when we talk about swimming, then one is the process of swimming. Second is there are different positions for swimming. So you can think of systems thinking as one of the tools which is there for making the policies. Or something like, for example, there are different types of coffees. There's cappuccino, there's dalgona, and then XYZ. There are tens of them. So yeah, it's just one of the tools which facilitates policy making as a process.
Yeah.
Also, I'm so sorry to intervene. Thank you so much, Parth, for answering that. But also, I feel that Kalpana is looking at it individually, like policymakers and system thinking. Kalpana, I think the confusion here is that policymakers should have an approach which is systems thinking. Okay, so there is no difference between policymakers and system thinking. Rather than policymakers should have an approach towards system thinking, like how a problem X is occurring. It's not just how a problem X is occurring, but how is it occurring continuously, continuously, continuously. That should be the main goal, main question. And I can see one more question if I missed it. The difference between CSR funds and donor funds. Of course. Now, CSR funds are the funds that are provided by the companies as part of their social or environmental responsibility commitments. But donor funds are provided by foundations or international organizations or governments or philanthropists. We can also look at the example that we just studied, okay, the GCF fund. It is one of the examples of donor funds. But let's suppose one company is funding, one company is trying to give money for like thousands of trees. That will be an example of CSR funds. But donor funds would be from an organization or from a foundation, from a government, etc., etc. It is seen from a developmental perspective. Thank you. I hope I have answered the question.
There's another question from Rizki Prasithyo. I hope I have pronounced that right. Does a governing body specifically designed for climate change able to break down the silo-ed mindset in the policy making level? What is the benefit and challenges since a new body institution often causes budget overrun and corruption?
All right. So basically, talking about different mechanisms, then there are different governments all across the world which have taken different measures. Like, for example, when we talk about Bhutan, then Bhutan has done away with the GDP. It focuses on a new indicator for measuring progress, which is the gross initial happiness. So that's one of the examples of coherence. Apart from that, Switzerland few years ago enacted an office, a department for policy coherence, which manages and which coordinates between different governments, with different ministries and different departments of the governance. And similarly, in India, we have the Niti Aayog at the national level, which again does the work of which is actively pursuing policy coherence both vertically and horizontally. In fact, as of now, as we talk, there is an active effort to also have Niti Aayog like bodies at state levels, which will basically be named the state institutions for transformation. And similarly, yeah, and as I stated in my previous example, the example of the government of Haryana, making new bodies, yeah, it makes things more complex, but at the same time, it can also racialize things and make things more cost effective and then cut down on things which are overlapping each other and save money. Although transparency and accountability is the key pillar in the entire process.
Also, I would like to add a little thing. I think here the goal is to not break down the siloed mindset, but it is to work together. Okay, it is to not have that siloed mindset. It is that the ministry should be working together. It is not. I don't think it is actually possible to make another institution or another body to not have that siloed mindset. Again, if another institution is made, I think they will have their own siloed mindset by saying, okay, we are made for this purpose and we should be serving this purpose. So again, the problem, which is the siloed mindset, will not be solved at the base level. It can only be solved if the ministries sit together to solve a problem. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sachi and Parth. Actually, we have one more question from Kalpana. That's great. Also, I, she has worked on a climate change related research project, but she doesn't know how she can launch it with the government. So, anyone?
Uh, okay. So, to be honest, it is really difficult to give an advice like this unless we know more about your project. So, probably we can have a discussion on that, get to know about your project better, and then advise that what can be done regarding it. And just to inform you, launching project with the government isn't the only avenue. Like there are other multiple philanthropies, multiple think tanks, and multiple intergovernmental organizations such as the UN or different UN bodies the to which you can get in touch regarding your project, and at times even they help. So the first step is mapping out that which entity it suits the most, and then taking action accordingly. Although we'll be able to only be able to guide better once we know a bit more about your project.
And I think you can also, if you're a university student or college student, you can launch it there first. Like you can discuss it with the professors, like the eco club professors at your university, and then you can take it forward. Professors may have, different links. So you can go through academia as one of the ways I think that works really well, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, so any more questions? Okay. Okay, so now that's a wrap on day two. A huge thank you to Parth, Shreya, and Sachi as well for such a grounded real world session, and to all of you for your energy and questions today. Make sure your day 2 submissions are in and organized. Our team will be reviewing them ahead of the panel. Get some rest, and we'll see you back there for day 3 as we take things even further. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending.